Oh,
So
wow.
there is one that is coming out actually on March 1st. I actually have a review copy of it that I've actually gotten a chance to play a little bit. It's on the screen now. It is Dead or Alive 6 by Koei Tecmo. And I mean, I've played Dead or Alive the series for years.
Hmm.
I must say it hasn't always been my favorite. And my reasoning for it not being one of my favorites is really kind of interesting, right? The characters are too large on the screen for me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And that is something that it feels like the characters are somewhat hindered.
Hmm.
And so that's always been my issue. And that's kind of it is what it is kind of a thing, because this is just the style of the way the game is made.
Hmm.
But it makes, to me, the characters are not as dynamic to me, and the movements aren't as exciting. But I think from a technical standpoint, it is a pretty solid. I know Virtua Fighter used to get a lot of respect for how technical it was as a fighting game. But because you're far more of a fighting game guy than myself, and I love fighting games, but I know you're more on that end. What has been your thoughts of the Dead or Alive series, and how are you feeling about DOA 6?
Well, DOA 6 is wait and see. My problem with Dead or Alive has always been two things. One, I'm much more of a 2D fighter than a 3D fighter. Um, and when it comes to the 3D fighting games, the one that I like the most is Soul Calibur. The
Mm-hmm.
one that's probably the best is Tekken. The one that's the most like technical and hardcore is Virtua Fighter. I don't think that Dead or Alive is a bad game, but it's very rock paper scissors. And my problem with the game has always been that there are not enough styles and variety in the characters. There's actually modders who put Dead or Alive models into Street Fighter V, and it was so interesting because the back of my brain was like, oh, well, this should make the Street Fighter characters more attractive because Dead or Alive focuses on making their characters more attractive. But what actually happened was they almost looked more like mannequins because they have so much less personality than the way Street Fighter designs its game. If you look at just the women in Street Fighter, you look at Laura and Cammy and Chun-Li and Juri and Mika, they all have such physically different bodies, but they all fight according to those bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same way in real life MMA, you look at Yoel Romero and you look at Francis Ngannou and you look at Israel Adesanya, they fight the way they look, and something clicks in your head that it's like it makes sense. Because as we said earlier, styles make fights. And when the evidence of that style is on your character in the way you move, it just kind of hits home. Dead or Alive has always focused so much on the aesthetics of their characters, but in a way that for me has been too separate from establishing a style of the characters. So I don't feel like the characters have enough different height, movement, speed, range, grappling differences that when I see a matchup, I'm really thinking of the styles make fights kind of thing, which is more present in a lot of the other games. Although generally a little less so in 3D games, which is probably why Virtua Fighter is the most hardcore, because that is a game where styles are very different. And in Soul Calibur, the styles are very different. It's very different watching Sophidia versus Mitsurugi than it is watching Raphael versus Astaroth. It's like a very different experience. Whereas with Dead or Alive, it just the animations are different, but the pace of the fight seems to be the same rock paper scissors kind of interaction. Although, whenever you discuss Dead or Alive, it's fair to talk about they've always had the burden of not being taken seriously because they promote, a sexuality in their game.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it fair. They do it with the men and the women, right? They're all made to be like attractive people for the most part. And, they've got the jiggle physics and all this stuff. And they recently had a big controversy. I don't know if you heard about it. But at Evo Japan, they were supposed to advertise their game. And I guess people thought it would be a regular advertisement, and what it actually was they had these two Japanese models, female models, and they were running through some of the stuff in the game and putting the characters in like exploitive positions. So they would have a guy power bomb a girl, and they would pause the screen and like zoom around it and laugh and giggle about where his face was in that animation. And then the girls started pointing at each other's various attributes. They started spanking one another and think they might have kissed each other.
Wow.
And they cut the stream because they said that it didn't reflect the core values of Evo. And it was very interesting. But you know, Japan and America are very different. This was Evo Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And the debate that came up out of it, first of all, the fighting game community totally trolled them with the core values hashtag, which you guys can look up and find some good comedy. But Mortal Kombat came out, and there's literally people ripping each other's faces off and dragging what's left of the face on the ground, throwing what's left of that up into a helicopter, and that's splitting up the parts and no one says anything. But as soon as you show any aspect of sexuality, everybody, you know, starts clutching their pearls. And it's an interesting dynamic in America that literally no level of violence, as long as it's adult on adult, no level of violence bats an eye. But a shirt that's cut too low, or, you know, a skirt that's too short, and we're like, what about the kids? And I bring this up with Dead or Alive because it is true that people don't talk about it enough as an actual fighting game. They talk about it more in terms of how they feel like, well, I'm embarrassed to play it because it feels like, you know, I'm a 12-year-old seeing his first, you know, whatever. And, you know, and that's an element of it. And I don't have an opinion of it here or there. I figure art is art. Do what you do. If there's an audience that's willing to buy it, as long as nobody's getting hurt, have fun. But as a fighting game, Dead or Alive lags a little bit behind. But I'm always interested in it because the first time I played Dead or Alive was on the Dreamcast.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and it was right. I was actually playing a lot of Tekken at that time, and the fluidity of Dead or Alive blew me away. It was like the best looking game on Dreamcast at the time.
Yes.
And I remember the first time I saw a counter, I'd never seen characters interact like that. Even though Paul from Tekken had counters and stuff, it didn't look the way it looked in Dead or Alive. But over the years, it still kind of feels like the Dreamcast version of the game to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not a high level Dead or Alive player, so if you are, feel free to correct me in the comments. Hit me with an Ask Us Bro with your opinion on it. I'm more than willing to get deeper into that game if it's a good game and it deserves it. But as of right now, if this was hot or cold, I'd be a chili warm. I'm going to look at it, probably not going to buy it.
Yeah, I feel
if there's a 3D game I'm going to play, it's definitely going to be Soul Calibur, which I like a lot this year.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see the scantily clad females in it, and I do feel like it's a little cheap. You know, like it's a little cheap. Like you're trying to lean on that, so to speak, as a piece of appeal for your game. Like they absolutely want to be known for that, you know, because it apparently from a financial standpoint, it has worked for them. You know, it has helped to individualize their game. They clearly are the most sexual fighting game out, without a question. But you know, I maintain. I still feel like the character's too big on the screen. I agree with what you're saying. The kicks, everybody's low kick looks the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it almost feels like you chain together the attacks, and they all feel like the same chained attacks. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like you're just swapping models more so than actual fighters.
And that's my issue. I feel like, Brian, to capitalize on that point, if the game was more dynamic, I don't care about the presentation of it, outside of the fact that the characters aren't different enough. You know, you said it's the most sexual. It's interesting you say that because they show the most skin, right? But the characters aren't, you know, interacting in a sexual way. Like,
well, I think that when I say that, it's like the women in the game. Like, put it like this: I'd forgotten
Yeah.
that was one of the things about Dead or Alive, right? I'd forgotten about it. So I didn't go into looking at it like, oh yeah, this is the sex fighting game. I didn't go into it thinking that at all, right?
Right.
So I turned it on and like one of the characters comes out and she's got on like something that like cuts right up to the top of the hip.
Yeah.
And she had on like, the thigh highs with the designs on the top and the joint. And then she had like a low cut thing. And then when she moved just a little bit, she gets the breast jiggle.
Start doing some crossovers.
She does the breast jiggle. I mean, like anime don't get me. I mean, I know there's some people's thing like they get super hot off cartoon girls. That's never been my thing, but I'm looking at it and I'm like, she jiggles here or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what this is the Dead or Alive thing. This is what they do, So it definitely is like, you don't have to actually put them in sexual situations to be sexual. You know what I mean? Like, it's just.
I just say I think it's different than being sexual.
Yeah, I don't know.
Than being overtly sexual.
Yeah.
Because there are games that are like that.
Yeah. But I guess I said like I was talking about from a fighting game standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, now don't get me wrong. Like Soul Calibur with Nina is like she could fall right into Dead or Alive.
Mm-hmm.
Easy. You know what I'm saying? Because she like from an entire standpoint and all that stuff, she would fit right in. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's definitely more sexually natured than than almost pretty much every fighting game. But
and there's a lot of booties hanging out in Street Fighter too. For the man and the women. And in fact, Tekken has underwear outfits, and that's why I say like I get it on the one hand because that is their focus. On the other hand, other fighting games. Yeah, to some people, other fighting games are closer in that aspect than they're being maligned for. But Dead or Alive is the only game in the musical chairs where they're left standing up, where people are like, "Too much breast." No.
Well, I think the reason being is because, like you said, they make it a part of their marketing package.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference. It's like I see Nina. On Soul Calibur, I'm like, well, she don't hardly have no clothes on. You know what I mean? And I see it, but it's not like part of the marketing. Like they're not going to set up something like you just said they set up at Evo. So it's just, I mean, I'm not like.
And also, it's worth saying that in Japan, sex is funnier than it is in America.
Oh yeah, the cultures are just totally different.
We take it very, very, very seriously here. Like every button you unbutton in America is like a different rating. Whereas in Japan, it's the human body is funny and sex is funny, and sometimes it's okay to laugh at that in a way that's no big deal to them.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that we take it more seriously than they do.
I 100% agree with that, and I've known that to be a fact for sure. But I didn't necessarily mention that to say, oh, well, this is like this. Horrible drawback of the game or anything like that. I think it's a characteristic of the game. It's no different than a movie that has sexual undertones to it or whatever. It's pretty much the same thing. So if that would be a turnoff for you in a film, it should be probably a turnoff for you in the game as well, because it's really the same thing. It's really the same thing. So I think sometimes because games are games and we automatically still in some ways associate gaming with children automatically, I think we have a different thing. But I do think it's just important to have a rating on the game. I think that is important. So then that kind of tells you what you should expect. And so just so anybody knows, you see that M there, it's rated M for mature. So they knew what to say. They're telling you what's in the game. And so you have you're armed with the right information for you to make the decision you want to make about whether or not you want to buy the game or not. So it is what it is. So